Welcome to The Joe Show, a podcast with insight and opinion on the information you need to know with your host, Joe Blyan.
Welcome to The Joe Blyan Show. Danse, how are you all doing? I'm glad to be back. I've been gone for a bit. I haven't been able to catch up to my work here. But that's no excuse. I'm back and I'm happy to be here. Again, I'd like to remind you today on my program, I wanted to talk about several things. But first of all, I'd like to thank all those people that got onto my show and gave me some feedback on it. I really appreciate that. Hopefully in the future that I can be able to bring back more controversial issues and just basic Aboriginal issues, because that's what I'm talking about. But today I'd like to interest you in a subject that was brought to my attention by several university students, and I think they're going to University of Alberta. I'm not sure. I'll have to check it out. Anyway, they wanted to know about First Nation and Metis relationships, and how do we live together? How do we associate with each other? And what goes on from day to day? I think I can qualify to identify my own personal experience and how I got along with First Nation people being a Métis. I'd like to do that, and I've certainly got over 70 years of experience in that. I think it's interesting to know that a lot of us sometimes don't even think about it. We just go along from day to day associating with First Nation Aboriginal people because it's so different today from years ago when our First Nation brothers were more reserved than they were downtown Edmonton or any other major cities. So there was a different kind of relationship in those days. As time went by, more freedom was given to them. And finally, in the 60s, and here in Alberta, anyway, they got their vote and other privileges that we as Métis people that have experience have had a privilege of enjoying over the years. So there was a lot of things that were different back when I was growing up. I was born in 42, so I saw the end of a real depressed area where I remember my father being a Métis, married First Nation woman from Loon Lake, Little Island Lake, Saskatchewan, and so we had an opportunity to participate both sides. We went to powwows, and we went to fiddle music and jigging and all that. That was part of our culture. So we had an opportunity to participate both sides. So I don't know if I'm the right guy to really be critical about, because I didn't have no problem. If I wanted to be Métis, I was Métis. If I wanted to be First Nation powwowing, that's where I went, It didn't bother me. And I spoke both languages fluently, by the way. So I don't have a problem. My mother never spoke a word of English. She tried speaking it, but she just refused. She said, if you can't talk to me in Cree, I'm not talking to you. That was her motto. But it was funny. And she made it. That's why out of 14 of us, 16, a couple adopted kids, all of us spoke Cree. Matter of fact, all of us spoke Cree. So our mother made sure that we did that, and I thank her for that. My father was the half-breed. He spoke English, French, and Michif and Cree. So him too had a lot of influence on us in his way of life. And as a matter of fact, my mother, I always remember her saying that she was happy to have that relationship because it didn't keep her in the reserve. She was happy to get out. And I was back in those 40s when that happened. So there was a lot of these things that happened in the early years that probably we don't think about, and nobody really ever talks about them. I remember my mother, this is a funny little story, because of the relationship at the time, because government was in charge of what you were going to be or what you're going to do. Once you married out, you lost your status, you became this and that. So I guess relationship has to, in some way, the government has influenced in a lot of ways how we're going to relate with each other. The Indian Act and reserves and Métis people, their role in the Canadian society. So there was a lot of difficult things, but yet we as Métis people had more freedom in many ways because we could vote. And although we didn't have a land base, and we, not from lack of trying, we lived in the shadows of the Muniao Nihio, because that's where we functioned, right in that area. Mind you, many Métis people were successful in the early years because of their European economic experiences. So over the years, we have been, as Aboriginal people, there's been a very mixed relationship, but very much cohesive in many ways, because the relationship went beyond saying Tansinishas. You were married to his sister or to his brother, First Nation Métis people. Many Métis people married into First Nation families, and vice versa. So I think throughout the years, in my own experience, we've never had an out-and-out disagreement with each other as Métis and First Nation people. At least not an out-and-out on the street fight. We had our own personal fights. Oh yes, there's no doubt about that. We waltzed outside, and that was quite normal. We did that with everybody, white folks and all. As Métis people, anyway, we stood our ground. And but I think in all, I'd say that we've always had a decent relationship. We criticized each other, and we had a lot of reason to do so, because there was difference in culture and tradition and values and standards, and even in many cases language. So yeah, we can criticize each other. That was quite normal. We will criticize other groups of people. But I think the relationship, what happened from what I personally experienced, is that when government started to interject, like for instance, when they create these Métis settlements, they said Métis people will now have land, and they say Métis people living there. In those days, many of us were married to First Nation women, and many of our aunts and our sisters were married to First Nation men, and yet these same people would live in the settlements. But nobody really cared, because there was really no value put on the membership. Membership was given for the sake of utilizing whatever was. And now we're down. We have another problem today. We have different groups of half-breeds now. We got recent immigrant half-breeds. Where do they go in? How do we relate to them? And our sisters and our daughters and have been intermarrying for how many years? There's more half-breeds in the reserves now than there are out here. What I mean by half-breeds, mixed marriages, mixed relationships, which originally was our claim as Métis people. We were mixed bloods. But now we got really mixed blood. I got a niece that's married to South African black people. And those I have, what are they? Are they colored half-breeds, or what are they now? South African half-breeds. So it's pretty difficult, because the relationship is so mixed now. But I think more important, there's several places we as Métis Aboriginal people, there's no relationship there, particularly in the justice system. They don't care. As long as they see an Indian, they just apply that justice onto us. And I think it's wrong. It is wrong. And it's sad when I think about that, there it doesn't matter what color, as long as you're an Indian, you don't have much chance in the justice system, as we know. And I think something that came to mind while we're talking about the relationship in those areas, like for instance in the mental health areas, in the health department areas, we're number one in there as well. And a lot of the different sicknesses that we have through drugs, alcohol, it's a very tough question, I guess, when you get out there and trying to get those services. How do you get them? Is there who's calling the shots as far as relationships are concerned? I do know that a lot of Métis people can't access a lot of services because of their status and so forth. So there's a lot of things that we're not in charge of. We're not the ones making the policies and so forth. So the other thing, I guess, is in different areas. How do we get along socially? I believe Aboriginal people have a very good social life. And like I said, we've never really ever really went against each other. You'll see a lot of Métis people at powwows and round dances. You'll see a lot of Aboriginal First Nation people at our dues at jamborees and music festivals. There's just many entertainers there. So that is a modern version of the Aboriginal people today in the relationship, the way I see it. Years ago, it was a little different. Today, I don't think too many people really pay attention to it anymore. Not like what we did at one time. And if you look, for instance, in the city of Edmonton, you can walk down the street, you'll never guess who you're meeting when you walk down the street. But there are a lot of First Nation people living in the cities now and urban settings. And so are Métis people. So how do they relate? They don't have any centers other than the Friendship Center. I don't know how much that's being used anymore. Other than that, there's no cultural centers. There's no places for real identification. So I guess when you see an Indian, you see an Indian, whether he's Métis or First Nation. That kind of relationship does exist today in our urban settings and all over. But as far as politically, we do support each other sometimes, but also I think there has always been a little indifferences between First Nation people and Métis people. For whatever reason, we've never really had an opportunity to sit down and clear the air, and I think that should be done, because in the future I think we're going to have a lot of problems here dealing with race, dealing with our grandchildren and our people, because we got lots of mixed races out there today, a lot of them. And we're having problems right now, by the way, with this Métis status thing. You know, the only thing that's happening with the Métis Nation, they're in control of, they say, of the membership, and that's all we get out of the Métis Nation is somebody's in charge of our membership, and I don't feel right about that, because I think we should be in charge of ourselves. You know, after all, we're in Section 9124 now. I don't think I really need a Métis Nation to tell me what to do, because all they want is my membership so they can attract money to say they're serving this and this for me. I can do that pretty well by myself, now that I'm under Section 9124, and thanks to the late Harry Daniels. Yeah, salute that man for having done that. Other than that, nobody else has done anything. So, folks, I think in a way when you talk about relationship, yes, there's a lot of reasons that why we should wake up to our relationship. How do we relate to each other? Socially, economically, culturally, and the language department all over. A lot of people say we lost our Métis Michif language. Sure we did. Lots of it's gone. And the Cree is going as well, and a lot of us are doing our best to keep it alive. So yeah, there's a relationship that the only way we can bring that back, to have a good relationship with First Nation Métis people as Aboriginal people, is to go back to the culture, to the tradition. We didn't have this problem years ago. We still don't, but it could be a problem. So I think it's, if this made any sense to you two guys that asked me for this information, let me know, because I think there's more to it than that. We have to think about the government itself, what kind of departments, they're the ones that are making policies to delegate and tell us what to do and how to do things in terms of health and all these different departments, including the justice system. So it's the big picture we got to look at. Who's in charge? And that's why we have so many problems out there with our people, is that we're not in charge, folks. And I think that's what we have to really look at. So thanks. I'm going to take a quick break, and I want to come back on a matter that is very interesting, that was brought to my attention. That's the recent legalization of marijuana. But in the meantime, I'd like to hear from you guys on that race relationship, and see if you can talk to me on this. Get a hold of me to joeblyan1@gmail.com. And do that, and I want to come back in a bit.
It's story time, folks, and if you've got a story, comment, or suggestion for the Joe Show, you can send those to joeblyan1@gmail.com. That's joeblyan1@gmail.com.
Yes, we were just talking about race relationship and how Canada itself had very few immigrants in the first year. Of course, the First World War, Second World War, different kind of immigrants, mostly from the European countries like Scotland, England, Ireland, all over those countries, and of course Ukrainians. Yes, definitely Ukraine, Polish, and that's who we kind of grew up with at the beginning of Canada, when Canada was being First World War, Second World War. Definitely after the Second World War, there was a lot of other immigrants coming into the country, and but very seldom you would see colored people. Unfortunately. Fortunately, in many cases, I think there was some in North Balfour. That's the ones that came to the railroad from the south. And we heard about them, but we've never very seldom saw them. And of course, traffic in those days, travel was very slow, so you didn't get to go too many places. So anyway, one day back home in Pierceland, Saskatchewan, we had a carnival every May 24th. They had Victoria Day, and of course they'd bring in the carnival, and all kinds of little shows. Rodeo would take place, and hot dogs and everything, the whole 9 yards. And of course we all went to town to see this, and this was the first time I've ever seen a colored guy in my life. And I've seen colored people on Tarzan comics and stuff like that, but never personally I've ever seen one. And it was kind of comical, because when we see something that we don't know, we've never seen before, I guess that's how we react to it. And of course, in Cree we call them Gastiliasak, and black people, And anyway, this young guy, he was a colored guy, but he was only about 5 foot, short little guy. And we never saw one before. And all of us kids were looking at him, and we just follow him all over, just wanted to see him, It was so strange, and once in a while he'd do a little tap dance for us, and we just all clap for him, He was kind of a comical little guy. He was doing all kinds of tricks for us, and this was the first time I've ever seen a colored guy. And we just all had fun. And it wasn't just us Indian kids following around. It was all the white kids, too. So he had more attention than anybody else in the whole place, because we were all following him around, just trying to... Of course, some of them, were trying to touch his hair and everything. And, it was really comical. I thought so anyway, because I was just talking about relationship, how we react. Oh, yes, and we did have one Chinese guy in town. His name was Li Kong. Yeah, he was a grand old man, that guy. He was my dad's buddy. That was the only Chinese guy I've ever known growing up. So I think when you talk about relationship today, we have so many immigrants and stuff like that. And I thought, just to give you an idea how some of us were introduced to the real world.
And this has been Story Time, folks. If you got a story, comment, or suggestion for The Joe Show, you can send those off to joeblyan1@gmail.com. That's joeblyan1@gmail.com. Now back to your host, Joe Blyan.
Yes, we broke off on our last segment there, and I said I'd be back to talk to you about marijuana. Very interesting subject, and of course on October the 17th, the year of our Lord, they passed the big D-Day. That's the day it was legal to smoke pot. Now, that's an interesting subject, of course, that we're not strangers to marijuana, and I suppose everybody's thinking about it, what's going to happen, and I don't think really too much is going to happen. We're all accustomed to it by now, I would think. It's all been in our lives one way or the other. I just got some notes here that I was, when I was looking at this, before legalization of marijuana, there were 8 laws pertaining to marijuana. Now there are 45. Now, let's talk about that for a minute. The reason I want to talk about this is not so much as legalizing the pot, and I said earlier, I had another comment that I was going to make. In the early days when the prohibition was on for the alcohol, the same exercise is happening today. Now it's legalized, and before that, everybody was bootlegging and moonshining and doing everything. Now it's legalized. The government is now going to be in charge, and he's been in charge of alcohol ever since as well. So let's look at this one now again. How much is it? And come on, folks, those of us that are Aboriginal, let's not bare our heads and make like we're not hearing anything here. It's going to affect us like you won't believe. And not only that, you got to think about the legalization of it. How many laws are pertaining to us Aboriginal people? and we're going to be hit with it. We're going to be stopped. We're going to be searched. We're going to be doing this on us again. And I think we have to wake up to that. And I think if there is going to be any financial benefits of the government selling pot, I think a lot of that money should be coming to these Aboriginal communities to deal with the mental issues that we have. And I think that's the effect of this whole exercise. It's not just legalizing it. There's a lot of things that's going to go into it. Remember, our children are already into the pot system. They're all into all kinds of drugs, never mind just pot. I think what we got to do is we have to wake up to this legalization and just quit thinking, it's easy for us now. We can just go to the wherever they sell it. It's not point. There'll still be people selling dope all over the country. You all know that. And, it's a matter of how we deal with it ourselves. And I think we can't bury our heads on this one. I think we have to wake up to the fact that it's going to affect us more ways than we can think of. And I think the government is obligated to help us on this, because when they legalize it, we're probably asked, but what are we going to say? And how much effect have we got? How much is our leadership doing anything about it? I haven't heard one leader say anything about this legalization. And that's it. It's not as if it's just something you legalize and walk away from. This is a very serious matter. I'd like to hear from other people too that would like to talk about this and maybe get in touch with me, because, like I said, it's going to have such a far effect on Aboriginal people that. And I'm really worried about the legal side of it, the RCMP, and how they're going to affect these reserves and settlements and Aboriginal communities. And every time something like this happens, they're the first ones that get the dollar, because they got us to practice on. So I think it's time that we really seriously look at this, and I want to hear from you guys. Anybody that wants to make a comment, I'd like you to call me, get in touch with me to joeblyan1@gmail.com. And yes, I really like to hear from people on this matter, because it is going to affect us very seriously.
You've been listening to The Joe Show with your host, Joe Blyan. If you have a comment, story, or a suggestion, you can send those off to joeblyan1@gmail.com. That's joeblyan1@gmail.com. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.